All right, so we're going to continue talking about our connective tissues. And so last time we talked about dense regular connective tissue. And so now we're going to move on to dense irregular connective tissue. So dense irregular connective tissue is going to be found so it has collagen running in many different directions, right? First off. So collagen in many directions. So it's going to provide strength in many directions, all right? So it's going to be very, very durable in many different directions, not just one direction like our dense regular connective tissue. So it's going to provide strength in many directions. Okay, and so you would want it in locations that undergo a lot of stress and strain. So one in particular location of dense irregular tissue is going to be heart valves. And so if you think about heart valves, that makes a lot of sense, right? They're constantly opening and closing and withstanding the pressure of blood pushing on them in your heart. So they need to be really, really strong in many directions. We also have dense irregular connective tissue under the skin. So the dermis of the skin that we're going to learn about, I think it's the next chapter, right? So the dermis has dense irregular. So that provides strength underneath that epidermis layer. The periosteum. So this is the layer of connective tissue that sits on top of the bone. This is actually the tissue that tendons will kind of weave into to attach to bone. All right, so tendons would be attached to muscle, and then they would be attached to the periosteum of the bone. So that periosteum needs to be really strong to withstand the tendons pulling on it all the time. All right, so the covering on cartilage, the perichondrium, is also going to be made of dense, irregular connective tissue. Okay, so it provides strength in many different directions. It's going to be chock full of collagen fibers, just like the dense regular. So it's going to need a lot of fibroblasts. And it is going to contain mostly, just like dense irregular, mostly collagen fibers. All right, there'd be a little hyaluronic acid ground substance kind of squeezed in there, but it is primarily going to be these collagen fibers that are going to make up that matrix. All right, and then our last dense connective tissue is going to be elastic connective tissue. All right, and so elastic connective tissue can be found in elastic arteries. All right, so a lot of arteries that withstand a lot of pressure, like your aorta, would be elastic arteries. So they need to be able to stretch and recoil. They would contain elastic connective tissue. And your vocal cords, all right, so your true vocal cords, the ones you use for speaking, all right, would be made of elastic connective tissue. So the function of that tissue is to allow for stretch and recoil. All right, so it needs to be able to stretch out and then bounce back afterwards. Whoops. All right, and so it's going to contain a ton of elastic fibers, right? So it's going to be made of mostly elastic fibers. And so to make all those elastic fibers, we're going to need a lot of fibroblasts. All right, so that's going to be the cells that we're going to find. Okay, so that's our elastic connective tissue, pretty simple. All right, so now that's the end of the dense connective tissues. Now we're going to move on to the category of cartilage. All right. So cartilage is unique among connective tissues because it is avascular, right? We said most connective tissues are vascular. However, cartilage is going to be that exception. Cartilage is typically avascular, so it does not have blood vessels. Okay, that makes it unique among all of the connective tissues. All right, and then it's surrounded by typically perichondrium, right? So this is that connective tissue on the outside. Right? It was that, remember we said it was dense, irregular connective tissue just a minute ago. All right, so it's surrounded by that connective tissue, and we're going to talk about 3 different kinds of cartilage that we can have, so different cartilage tissues. Okay, so let's talk about our first type. So our first type is the most common in the body, and it's called hyaline cartilage. All right, so hyaline is the most common. You can find it in your nose, your costal cartilage, which is the cartilage that connects your ribs to your sternum, right in the center. There's a little piece of cartilage that actually connects your ribs to your sternum. And so that's called costal cartilage. That's made of hyaline cartilage. The embryonic skeleton starts out, and we'll talk about this when we go through bone and how bone's made. It starts out as hyaline cartilage. So that would be made of hyaline cartilage. And the articular cartilage. So this would be articular cartilage, the cartilage that is found on the ends of long bones. Right, and so the ends of long bones where they meet other bones. So let's say in your knee, where your femur, right, meets your shin bone, the tibia, the ends of each of those bones would be covered in hyaline cartilage to kind of cushion and protect it where they're meeting and kind of reduce friction between the two. That's called articular cartilage. Okay, so the function of hyaline cartilage is mostly going to be cushioning and some flexibility. All right, so cushioning and flexibility. Okay, just depending on where it's located. Okay, and so the cells in cartilage are called chondrocytes. All right, so chondro being the prefix for cartilage. Chondrocytes are cartilage cells. And so chondrocytes, based on the matrix of the cartilage, they're going to actually live in these little kind of cavities in the cartilage called lacunae. All right, so this is a cavity in the cartilage. Okay, and so because unlike if you're thinking about blood, right, which is very fluid matrix, cartilage has a much firmer matrix. And so these cells can't just float around in the matrix of the cartilage, so they're kind of trapped where they're located in these lacunae. Okay, so if you look at this kind of drawing over here, that's what we're seeing. So this dark area here, this would be the lacunae. All right, we have 2 cells living in this particular lacunae. Okay, so lacunae actually means lake, right? So it's like a little lake that our chondrocytes live in. Okay, it's their home. All right, so that matrix is going to be a little different than what we've seen so far with our other connective tissues because it's harder in consistency. And so it includes chondroitin, sulfate, and these may be familiar to some of you, glucosamine. All right, and so if you've ever, like I have an older dog who's arthritic, right, a supplement that you typically give for arthritis is a supplement that contains chondroitin and glucosamine because that helps with joint mobility because the matrix in the cartilage that's in the joints is made of this chondroitin and glucosamine. All right, so that is the ground substance of the cartilage, all right? And it gives it much more of a firm consistency than hyaluronic acid would, all right? And so it also is going to have some fibers, all right? So some collagen fibers, but they're not going to be visible when you're looking at like a microscope slide, all right? So not visible. Okay, so that's our hyaline cartilage, our most common type of cartilage. All right, so our next type of cartilage is fibrous cartilage, or fibrocartilage is sometimes what it's also called. So you may see that somewhere too, right? So fibrocartilage, that's going to be referring to the same thing. Okay, and so fibrocartilage, its function is that it's really strong and durable. All right, so strength and durability. In particular, I always think of it as being able to withstand a lot of pressure on it. All right, and so it's going to be located in a lot of places that receive a lot of pressure. So in your knees, you actually have fibrocartilage that forms the meniscus. It's like this cartilage pad in your knees, all right? Meniscus of the knee. And so if you think about it, when you're standing all day, that's a lot of pressure being put on your knees to hold up your weight. And so it needs a very durable substance there to withstand that pressure, and that's fibrocartilage. All right, and then also your intervertebral discs. All right, so those are the pads of fibrocartilage between your vertebrae. Those are made of fibrocartilage, right? And they do withstand a lot of pressure as you're standing or even sitting, right? Your vertebrae are all kind of being pushed together by gravity, and that would need to withstand a lot of pressure. Okay, and then it's also found in the pubic symphysis. All right, you'll learn about this when you learn about bones, but it's a little tiny piece of fibrocartilage on the anterior part of your pelvis that links your right and left pelvic bones together. So that's just a little piece of fibrocartilage there. Okay. And so for the fibrocartilage, the cells are going to be the same, right? Our same cartilage cells, chondrocytes. All right. And those chondrocytes are going to be making that matrix. It's going to have a lot of dense, right? The fibrous part of the name of this collagen is going to have dense collagen. Lots of collagen fibers. Okay, and that's going to give it that durability and that ability to withstand a lot of pressure, right? And so that's kind of what you're seeing here, right? These are all a lot of collagen fibers kind of all running through here, right, on this tissue. Okay, so that's fibrocartilage or fibrous cartilage. All right, and then our last type of cartilage is elastic cartilage. So the name kind of tells you it is elastic. It's very flexible. So that's its function, is to be flexible, right? So flexibility. Okay, and so it's only found in a few places. It's not very, very common in the body, but it makes up the external ear. All right, the cartilage in your external ear is elastic cartilage. And then it's also found in the epiglottis. All right, so the epiglottis is it's a little piece of cartilage that covers up your windpipe when you're swallowing, so food doesn't go down your windpipe. Okay, so that's made of elastic cartilage. The cells are going to be our cartilage cells again. So we have chondrocytes. All right, those chondrocytes are going to be making the matrix, which in this case is going to be mostly elastic fibers. All right, so mostly elastic fibers. All right, and so that is our elastic cartilage, pretty simple. Okay, so those are 3 types of cartilage. All right, so now we're going to move on to osseous tissue. All right, so osseous is referring to bone tissue. So osseous tissue is bone tissue. We have 2 different types for that. So our first one is compact bone. All right, so compact bone is going to be located in the shaft of long bones and kind of the outer portions of flat bones. All right, so shaft of long bones and outside of flat bones. We'll talk about this in a second. All right, so long bones, and we'll learn this when we do our bone chapter. Outside of, I got ahead of myself. Here we go. Flat bones. Okay. So long bones would be, like your arm bones, right? So they're longer than they are wide. Your femur would be a long bone, your humerus on your upper arm, your radius and your ulna on your forearm, those would be long bones. Your shin bone, the tibia, that would be a long bone. So all those long bones, the shaft, right, the long part, that would be made up of compact bone, right? And so compact bone is very, very strong and durable. Okay, so strength, and surprisingly, it has a little bit of flexibility, which is essential for its function. All right, so strength and some flexibility. All right. And then flat bones, these would be like your skull bones, right? They're thin and very flat, and the outer edges of those would be made up of this compact bone. Okay, and so with bone, our cells are going to be osteocytes. All right, and so those osteocytes, those are mature bone cells. And we'll also talk about in the bone chapter osteoblasts. All right, so these are going to be very young bone cells, right? So these are going to be bone cells that are making new bone, right? When your bones are growing. Okay, so these are going to be young bone cells, right? And they can make bone. They lay down that matrix, that ground substance. All right. And so we're going to learn all about that in a different chapter. So this is just kind of a general overview here. Okay, so the matrix of bone is called osteoid. It's made by those osteoblasts, and it actually has its own special name. It's called osteoid. All right, made by the osteoblasts, and it calcifies and becomes that hard bone substance that you're probably familiar with. All right, so so then it calcifies to become really hard. So that's going to be the ground substance. And then it's also going to contain some collagen as well. And so that collagen is what's going to make the bone slightly flexible. And we'll talk about this again when we do our chapter on the bone and its physiology. Bone, if you remove all of the collagen from bone, which you can do if you take like a chicken bone and bake it at a really, really low temperature for a long time, you'll destroy all that collagen because it's just protein, and heat will denature it. That bone will become extremely brittle because all you have left is that calcified osteoid, all right? And it's very, very brittle. Likewise, you can also remove all of that calcified bone matrix, all right, by soaking a bone in vinegar for a long time. So if you do that with like a chicken bone, what you end up with is only collagen left, which gives you this kind of, it's almost like a rubber bone. Okay, so you need both of those together to get like a fully functional bone. Okay, so it can be hard because of that matrix, right, that calcified matrix, but also slightly flexible, which prevents it from being brittle. Okay, so then when we look at our bone tissue, it's very organized and very structured. All right, and so you should know a few different structures. This bone is great in the lab because you can very easily, as soon as you see this on like a lab exam, you know you're looking at bone. It looks kind of like a tree trunk, right? So you have like a tree trunk that's been cut open. It has like the rings like trees do. And so one of these kind of tree trunk structures, right, like this, is called an osteon. All right, so the osteon is one ring structure, and in the middle of that is it's this canal that contains all the blood vessels. That's called the Haversian canal. All right, so you have the Haversian canal in the middle of the osteon. Okay, and then you have all the rings, right, like the rings on a tree trunk. Each of those rings is called a lamellae. Okay, so that would be a lamellae. There would be another one here, right? So the rings are the lamellae. And then sitting on those rings, you can actually see, right? These are the cells. And they end up, when you're looking at an actual slide, they end up just looking black, all right, like this. That's where our cells are. Those are the osteocytes. And so those osteocytes, because bone is hard, similar to cartilage, it's even harder than cartilage, these are going to be in lacunae as well. Just like our chondrocytes. All right. And then the last feature to point out for this is that between the cells and these lamellae, there are these little channels connecting them to each other. All right. So there are these little threads connecting these cells to the cells in the next lamellae. Those are called canaliculi. All right. So these little threads here are canaliculi, little canals, and they connect cells to other cells. All right, and they allow nutrients from these blood vessels here in the middle to move all the way out to all these cells here at the edge. Right, they can travel through those little canaliculi. Okay, so that's our compact bone. All right, then we also have spongy bone. Okay, and so spongy bone, there we go. Spongy bone is going to be found on the ends of long bones. All right, so the ends of long bones. All right, and then the middle of flat bones. All right, so kind of if we had a flat bone, right, you would have like a sandwich, right? You would have compact bone, and then, or like an Oreo, if you think of, right? Compact bone is the Oreo cookies, and then in the middle, you have a layer of spongy bone. That's your flat bone. All right, so the middle of flat bones. Okay, so on this picture, right, this, and it kind of looks like these little like networks, almost like a, you know, like a web, right? That's what spongy bone, it looks like sponge, right? So that's what spongy bone looks like. Okay, and so it's found ends of long bones, the middle of flat bones, and it provides some support, right? It's not nearly as strong and durable as compact bone because it does have all those spaces, right? So it's not as able to withstand pressure, but it does provide some support. All right, and importantly, it contains the red bone marrow. All right, and so red bone marrow is essential because that's where all of your blood cells are made. All right, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, all of those are made in the red bone marrow. All right, and all of that is housed in the spongy bone, right, in all of those cavities and spaces in the spongy bone. Okay, so our cells, we do have cells, and so you can kind of see on this picture here, right, if you cut open one of these little kind of branches, right, of the spongy bone, it has these little cells dotting in it, connected by, you know, little canals. The cells are osteocytes, right? There are bone cells, just like in compact bone. okay? And the ground substance, right, is going to be the same as compact bone. It's just going to be arranged differently, right? So the same as compact bone. So it's made of the same stuff, it's just arranged very differently. It's not as tightly compacted, there's more spaces within that spongy bone. Okay. Good. Just making sure I didn't want to point out anything else. Okay, great. All right, and so for the last part on this video, right, we're going to finish up connective tissues by talking about fluid connective tissues, of which we have two, okay? So our first and probably the one you're most familiar with type of fluid connective tissue is blood, all right? So blood is a liquid connective tissue. It is found in blood vessels, all right? I think that's the easiest location for you guys to know, all right? In blood vessels, also in the heart, all right? Most of your blood is going to be out in blood vessels though. And the function is to transport things, right? There's actually many functions. So transport, that would be for blood or for oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, waste, right? All those things are going to be transported. Immunity is controlled by blood because of those white blood cells, and also clotting because of the platelets is going to be another function of blood. Okay, so lots of functions for blood, very, very important, obviously. All right, the cells in blood, there's going to be a few different kinds. We're going to have red blood cells, white blood cells, all right, and I'm going to put this in quotation marks, platelets. But platelets are not actually cells, right? They're little bitty cell fragments, but they're not complete living cells. Okay, but they're present in blood. So we're looking at the picture here. Red blood cells, you can always tell them from a white blood cell because red blood cells do not have a nucleus. All right, so this would be a red blood cell, and they look almost like donuts. So if you're looking at a red blood cell from the top, right, it looks kind of like this with like a little donut in the middle. And that's because when you're looking at it from the side, if we flip this and looked at it from the side, it would look kind of like this, right? And so it's very, very thin in the middle, which is why it ends up looking almost like white in the middle. So there's no hole in it like a donut, but the two pieces of plasma membrane are so close together that it looks almost like there's a hole. All right, so that's how you can recognize a red blood cell. They don't have a nucleus, all right, no nucleus. So this would be red blood cells all over here. They're the most common cells in blood. And then if you see a cell like this, right, slightly larger in this one, and you see a definite nucleus, like this guy has a nucleus that has many different lobes, all right, that's a white blood cell. White blood cells have a nucleus, red blood cell does not have a nucleus. And then we have kind of scattered here, right? These would be possibly little platelets, okay? They're just gonna be little bitty cell fragments. They just almost look like dirt when you're looking at a slide. Okay. And then with blood, for the matrix, that matrix is gonna be plasma, okay? Whoops. All right, so plasma is going to be made of mostly water. All right. And then within that plasma, there are some fibers, but they're not visible unless the blood is clotting, right? So fibers only visible during clotting. So you won't see, if you're looking at the microscope slide like this, you're not going to see any fibers, all right? And you wouldn't want fibers present normally in blood because, you know, you could end up blocking up blood vessels with those fibers, right? And you definitely don't want that. Okay. Then our last type of connective tissue is also a fluid connective tissue. It is called lymph, okay? And so lymph is found in lymph vessels, right? Just like blood is found in blood vessels. Okay? And so lymph is essentially comes from the fluid that kind of leaks out of your blood vessels. So if you've ever, seen or known somebody who has had edema, or if you stand for a really long time and maybe your feet swell up a little, that's because fluid's leaking out of your blood vessels and accumulating, among your tissues, right? That fluid is called the lymph. And so your lymph vessels will help to collect that, and it actually returns it to your blood, all right? But that's what lymph is, okay? So it's kind of fluid that's leaked out from your blood vessels. And so it's carried by lymph vessels, and it functions in, removing, as I said, removing excess fluid. And also, it's going to be really, especially other lymph organs, right, that help to filter this lymph. It's really important for immunity. All right, so lymph is very highly monitored by the immune system. And so one cell that you can find in lymph is white blood cells. Okay. All right, and so with lymph, there's no fibers. None of the fibers from blood that are present during clotting, none of that ends up in lymph. Really, it's mostly just water. There's some ions and stuff like that, but not much else. Okay. All right, so we're going to stop there, and then in the last video for this chapter, we'll pick up and talk about muscle tissue.